Thank you so much, Cassandra. And thank you for inviting me to this meeting. Thank you especially to the North American Chilean Chamber of Commerce and to Manuelita and Felipe who put this panel together. And it's an honor to be with these distinguished colleagues, Natalia, Claudio, Ernesto, with whom we were together at the Technical Commission for the Constitutional Reform that started this process. So Manuelita sent us an email in the beginning of our conversations about having this panel, and she said, we would like you to talk about the origins of the process, how it will be carried out, and the possible outcomes of the process, and also the pros and cons of the approval and the rejection options, which are the two options that will be in the ballot on the 25th. So I will try to very briefly address these points that Manuelita presented. So the first is the origin. Where does this come from? What happened in Chile? Some people said that it seemed that there had been an alien invasion in the model country in Latin America. We were the example for the region, an example of stability, of economic growth. And in fact, I still, when I go to meetings with Latin American friends who are talking about comparative analysis of Latin American countries, they still place Chile together with Costa Rica and Uruguay as outliers in the region in terms of stability, in terms of democratic ways to solve social problems, and of course also with regard to economic performance. But I think what is behind this, the problem we're facing now, is that even though Chile has been growing, I think it's undeniable that Chile had a good economic performance during the last decades, and it grew very much, and it especially diminished poverty in a very dramatic way. Poverty was very sharply reduced in the last 30 years. But together with reducing poverty, I think there has been all of these years a hidden discontent regarding two main aspects: an economic aspect that has to do with social vulnerability, the lack of social protection, and a political discontent regarding an increasing mistrust in all elites. This has been shown by several studies, and there's a UNDP report of 2015 in particular that shows the disconnect between regular citizens and elites, all kinds of elites, economic elites, political elites, and even social elites, which are supposed to be closer to the people. So, so I think this has to do with certain flaws of our transition to democracy. And from the political side, which is what I care more about because of the things I study, I think institutional rigidity has been a very crucial problem that helps explain what is happening today. I think we've had democracy. I'm not. Some people say that there is no democracy in Chile at the extreme, at some extreme, and I think that there's undeniable. It's undeniable that 1990 was a regime change. Dictatorship stopped in 1990, and we began the democratic life. We recovered democracy in 1990, but the democracy we recovered was a democracy with many, what Garreton calls enclaves, with things that we inherited from the dictatorship and that were not changed for a very long time. So in my view, I think that democracy was not the result of a negotiation between two sides. It was not a negotiated transition to democracy, but it was more the result of the imposition of a veto power in the hairs of the dictatorship. So I think that this has to do with this institutional rigidity, has to do with maintaining that veto power in a minority that is mostly an economic minority and political minority that inherited unworn privileges in the political system from the dictatorship. So with this, I want to say that I don't think we are, the constitutional rigidity in Chile is not the consociational model that Aaron Liebhardt describes in consociational democracies. So it's It's rather an imposition by force. And so what Ackerman called, so this brings us to the discussion about supermajorities. So Ackerman, in his discussion, Bruce Ackerman, a constitutionalist from Yale, said that you can protect stability with supermajorities, but before you protect that stability, you have to build a legitimate agreement. And I think what we're lacking is that original legitimate agreement. And so we have protected with supermajorities things that were imposed by force, by the weapons, really. And the result of that is that instead of having first the social contract and then the supermajorities to protect that social contract and give stability to the political system, we've had a model and a level of inequality imposed by force and maintained by this veto power. So I think that explains the lack of distributive policies in the last decades. And of course, and I think the outburst in the last, since October last year, has led to an analysis of the transition where you can see the good side of democratic transition with, as I said, poverty reduction, economic growth, political stability, particularly in the 1990s, but also the bad side of excessive benefits to entrepreneurial elites and of a deepening of neoliberal economic policies that have, and the political system has not moved towards universal social coverage, aside from very small social policies like AUGE or a limited health program. So, and there's also not, you can see there has been no change in a tax structure, which today leaves inequality unchanged before and after taxes. So the level of inequality in Chile is unchanged by taxes. And with regard to the distance between elites and citizens, I think there's many indicators of that. The decrease in voter turnout came down from over 85% in the beginning of democracy to 34% in some municipal elections and around 50% in most presidential elections. Not only voter turnout decreased, but also there's a very low identification with political parties, a very low identification with coalitions, left and right, and a very low identification actually with the left and right divide itself. So, and this seems to have been unnoticed by center-left governments for many years. There's a book about, there's a chapter in a book by Hoover, Preble, and Stephens called The Chilean Left in Power, published in 2010, so many years ago. And they asked themselves why concertation policies, the center-left coalition policies, were not moving the country in the direction of economical and political redistribution. And on the contrary, the country moved towards increasing individual debt and targeted social programs during those years. So I think that to end the part of what's going on, I think the deceleration of economic growth 5 years ago made more evident all these problems with the economic model. The debt in families increased from over 50% to around 70%. So there's a very high level of indebtedness to pay for for basic needs. And also we don't have channels to mediate between society and politics, because political parties have become, as Luna and Altman wrote in 2010, uprooted but stable. We have a stable political system, party system, but those parties have completely lost their root in society. So what happened in the last years is that political parties became more and more irrelevant, okay, and in turn, what became more relevant was social movements. So to end my starting remarks, how will this be carried out? We have 3 elections. We have now the 25. Oh, I thought it was Cassandra making me stop.
1 more minute to go.
Okay, so we have the October 25 plebiscite, where people will be asked, do you want a new constitution or not, approval or rejection, and which body should make this constitution, a mixed convention with representatives from Congress and elected representatives, or a completely elected convention. And then we have the third electoral moment, which is the exit plebiscite in 2022, in the second half of 2022. What are the outcomes, the possible outcomes of this? I think we have the possibility to improve political trust and to improve politics in Chile. But I think we are walking a very thin line towards this institutional reconstruction, because people don't trust political parties, people don't trust politicians, and they are, I think, the main people doing in charge of carrying this out. So I think the outcome will also be to give more room to the political play, to create certain levels of uncertainty, which I know uncertainty is scary, but at the same time, if you don't have uncertainty, as we didn't have with the binomial electoral system for many years, then the basis of the political legitimacy are reduced. So I think there will be more uncertainty for sure, but also there will be probably an institutional way to solve some of the social tensions that Chile is living now. So I think the approval is what can bring more stability and more social peace in Chile. And I think the rejection would be very bad news, because it would maintain this level of stress and of conflict. And I'll leave it there, and then we can discuss some more.
Anyone that wants to send me direct questions, I am pulling together a sheet of questions for the end. Thank you, Claudia. Ernesto, welcome. And the floor is now yours.
Hi, Cassandra. Thank you very much. Thank you, Manuelita, also Felipe. I'm happy to share the floor today with Claudio, also with Natalia. We have been working together for years. And with Claudia, as she mentioned, we worked together in the technical committee to prepare the first draft for the constitutional amendment that started this process. Let me start by saying that I think what's happening in Chile, it's related to a story of success, not to a story of failure. The 30 years after when the democracies came back after Pinochet government, I think had been a very good story of a country that was able to have a political system that was taking steps in order to move towards democracy, in order to provide and create economic growth and provide better quality of life for citizens. And I think we're facing the challenges of that process. And that process can lead to different directions. One possible direction is to be able to move forward in relevant reforms. Other alternative is to write a new constitution. We are writing a new constitution. And I think that a better way for our country would be to move forward, going step by step, including new amendments and reforms to address relevant problems that Chile still have and we haven't been able to address. 15 years ago, it was also 15 years after the Pinochet government finished, our president of Chile, President Ricardo Lagos, said, while signing a very relevant package of reforms to the Constitution, he said, "Today we solemnly sign the democratic Constitution of Chile. This is a very big day for Chile. We have reason to celebrate. Today we finally have a democratic Constitution, in accordance with the spirit of Chile, the permanent soul of our country. This is our best tribute to independence, to the national glories, to the glory of and the strength of our national understanding. We met inspired by the same spirit of 1833 and 1925 to give Chile and Chileans a constitution that will help us to move forward into the 21st century. This is an achievement of all Chileans." This was only 15 years ago, and these words belong to former President Ricardo Lagos. He's a socialist. He was a very relevant player in the center-left in the Chilean transition, and I trust his words. He has been saying that he changed his opinion, but that was the perception that the leader of the country shared with all us only 15 years ago. Things are changing fast, and now we're in a process that I should say I think in October 25, the approval is going to win. The 100% elected convention is going to win. And so we're going to start a process of a year and a half, of 2 years, in order to rewrite the Constitution. In my view, the main problem is that, and I agree with Claudia in one of the points that she mentioned, that the political system is not being able to collaborate and cooperate in a way that helps to address the relevant problems that the population is having, especially middle-income country problems like pension reform, healthcare, the way the citizens participate in the democratic systems, and others. But in my view, it would have been better to address those problems through institutional reforms and constitutional reforms instead of writing a new constitution. But we're going to face that process. So how is that process going to work? As Claudia mentioned before, we're having this referendum in October where we are going to have two questions. The first one, if people want to rewrite a new constitution or not. And the second one is which kind of assembly or convention you want to write the constitution. One alternative is 100% elected convention, and that convention is elected in the same way and voted in the same way the members of the House of Representatives are elected. 155 members in 28 electoral districts, in magnitude of the districts between 3 and 8. There are some changes related to gender parity, the participation of independents, and now we are in a process of including some minorities and native Chileans in the ballots. The other alternative is to have a convention 50% elected, and the other half from members that are appointed or elected by Congress. I would prefer that convention for different reasons. I don't know if we're going to have Cassandra time to discuss about that, but only two arguments, very short, and there are arguments for both of the conventions. The reasons for me in order to prefer a mixed convention is that, number one, the seats per district in the mixed convention goes from 2 to 4 compared to seats 3 to 8 in the 100% elected convention. And in my view, it's really important to have more moderate positions in the convention. I know that there is disagreement on that, but that's my reason to prefer a mixed convention, because I think more moderate positions would be placed in the convention, and that's very, very important if you want to get a high level of consensus in order to pass a new constitution. My second reason for choosing that vote, and I understand there are other opinions, is that there is some experience in Latin America and in other countries that constitutional assemblies sometimes try to get power from other political institutions. If you want to avoid that, one for that is to have members of Congress that were elected by vote, and that can also help to frame that debate. There are a couple of issues that I think we may discuss maybe later today that are related to the way the Constitutional Convention, that will have almost a year to work, 9 months, and if they don't reach an agreement within that period, they will have an extra 3 months period to work. So it's a 1 year process. And that convention is going to reach agreements by 2/3 of the votes for each constitutional norm or regulation or article. And we are having a relevant debate in Chile on how to work with that. And the other issue under debate is the idea of blank slate. If we don't reach an agreement, no agreement at all, the current constitution will keep in place. If there is one article approved in the convention, that would be the proposal of the new constitution that will go to the final referendum. So the idea of a blank slate, or if we are starting from nothing, it's part of the debate now in Chile. Claudia, we worked on the technical committee and we agreed, and we put that on the constitution, that there are some elements that the convention must respect at all time. For example, that Chile is a democratic republic, that we should respect international treaties and agreements that we have signed so far and other provisions. But we don't know how the convention is going to work. I have two more points, just to be brief at this introduction. I would prefer to keep introducing reforms, and I understand that we have been slow at that process, and we need to move faster on that. And and I also understand that one of the main problems for political collaboration is how our political system is designed. Two examples from my viewpoint. Number one, we changed the binominal electoral system for the House of Representatives, and that was sort of a majoritarian system in order to change it for a proportional system. That create or allow for more representation, and that's good. But now we have, instead of 2 coalitions, 3 coalitions at least. We have a lot more political parties, and transaction costs in order to reach agreement have increased. That's one point in my view that it's having an impact in the difficulty of having collaboration in the political system. The other one is that we are having a presidential system with coalition with minority. Not enough votes in Congress in order to pass or approve the program. We need to work on that. And that's something that the convention should work. Finally, 2 comments. Number one, even though I vote reject and I prefer a 50% elected and 50% members from Congress in the convention, I think I'm optimistic for the future. 2 reasons. Number one, I think we have polarized elites, but moderated citizens. And I think that's going to help in the process in order to have common sense and to find reasonable agreements during the convention. The second one is that so far we have been able to give to our country good leadership. I have some doubts now of what's happening in the last 5 years or so, but during the last 30 years, our leaders have been good enough for addressing challenging issues. Finally, I'm a little concerned of the levels of violence that is coming back to our country. I think that's bad. I found a very good statement from some of the political parties on the center left saying that violence is really bad, but not from all of them. I think that's the first priority for the next 10 days before the vote of October 25. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernesto, for that vision. We will surge onward. Some people might like speed dating. I think that this is a great new concept, speed idea exchanging. Onward, Claudio. Let's get through.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you listen to me? Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you to the Chamber for the invitation to talk a little bit about the political process in Chile. I will try to not to mention my particular views about certain issues, and I will try to, one professor in North Carolina told me that if you are facing an American audience, you need to make 3 points. So I will try to make 3 very basic points, and that's it. The first point is that we are facing, I think, and I thank Claudia and Ernesto. I think that saved me a lot of time to explain the context. So I will focus mostly in the process that we are facing in the next for the next 2 years. The first point is the following. I think that this is a very highly institutionalized process, and I think that that is a very good opportunity for Chile and bring back the institutionalism that have been very present in the Chilean political system. And why I'm saying that? Because of the particular future of the constituent process that we will face in the next 2 years. We will have an entry plebiscite for the first time in history, asking the people and engaging the people in this political process. So we will have this entry plebiscite asking, do you want a new constitution, and the mechanism by which you want to write this constitution, which is is not very frequent in Latin America. This is the third country in Latin America that faced this kind of plebiscite. Secondly, we will have very clear rules for electing the member of the assembly or the convention. Third, we will have rule of appealings. Once the convention is approved, the convention, if they have a problem, they can appeal to the Supreme Court to deal with the way to interpret the constitutional setting that was established in last December. Fourth, we will have limits for the convention. Ernesto was telling, he talked about the limits of respecting the idea of having a democracy, respecting international treaties that Chile signed already, etc., etc. Another feature of this particular convention is the timing. The Chilean political process define a timing, and I think that this is very relevant. Some political process, some convention in other parts of Latin America didn't have this deadline, and I think that the deadline for a convention for writing or crafting a constitution is crucial, because the political actors are forced to agree upon a certain future of the convention, because otherwise it will be dissolved after 12 months. And finally, we will have an exit plebiscite in which the citizen, again, and by mandatory plebiscite, will have to accept or reject the new text that would be approved by the convention, wherever which convention it is. So we have an institutionalized process. The second feature, and I think that is key from a political perspective and from a comparative perspective, is that all players are accepting this. And I think that this is a key element. In Venezuela, in 1999, the right wing didn't want to participate. And this is one of the main problems with the convention in Venezuela. It was not part of an agreement of all main political actors of society. In Colombia, in Brazil, in Argentina, you had in that processes an agreement, an overall agreement of political actors from right to left. Even though Ernesto is rejecting the idea of having a new constitution, he said, hey, but we will have a new constitution. So I don't know if you are giving up or not, but it's a joke. But it's crucial that the right wing is within the process. I mean, those that are rejecting now the idea of having a new constitution need to be included. I think that is a key feature for Chile, and in this case, that will happen. Why? Because of the electoral system that Ernesto depicted. Because the left is also included, even the Communist Party that at the beginning was not part of the agreement, now is on board. So I think that is a good process of including actors. I think that is a key issue to maintain this agreement. Now I will talk a little bit about the problems that we're facing. Everything is not like great. The third point is that I think that is connected to what Claudia was saying at the beginning. I think that the Chilean society is experiencing this transformation. society is demanding participation, is demanding what is called the mirror that representation mirror what they want and what they are. And I think that this demand for trying to get a representative or representation like a mirror of what they are is fundamental. And I think the political parties are have not been very keen to open up power, of course, that is very usual thing to do. But the fact that we have in this process parity for the first time in history in any convention in the world, we might have a parity system that force and establish parity by result is a very interesting step of the women movement pushing for reform and trying to express this idea of participation, which I think is relevant. The second issue that had been, discussed right now is the reserved seat for indigenous people, which probably will be approved. I think that is also a good signal for openness and inclusion. And the third is including independent within list, which was not accepted for the traditional regular elections, and now they're accepting independent as a list to compete against political parties, which also is an expression of this openness of the political system. So the demand of society is trying to participate in this process. And I think that the challenge for this process is particularly this, like how the political parties are including mechanism of participation, mechanism of inclusion. I think that the Colombian case is interesting in 1991. For those that are familiar with the case, I think that they were facing a strong violence time. Yes, okay, 2 minutes. And it was very relevant at that point, the establishing mechanism of participation of civil society. I think that what at the end, and that is my bonus track point concerning violence, which was mentioned by Ernesto, I think that is problematic violence. In my opinion, political parties do not control the process of social protest and violence particularly. They are not controlling that. I mean, even the most radical lefty groups are not able to control that. And I think that if the constituent process do not include mechanism of participation and in which the citizen feel participate in this process of creating a new way of defining the rules, I think that that would be very problematic for the political system as a whole. So I finish with this final point.
Thank you very much, Claudio. We will now move on to Natalia Gonzalez to bring our conversation, bring the house down, Natalia.
Thank you, Cassandra. And I have the difficult mission of being the last. And I hope that you're not sleeping because my 3 colleagues have been very interesting in their presentations. So I just hope that this last one is going to be even more interesting. I hope so. Well, what I want to talk about is that I agree with Ernesto that I think the story of Chile and the current challenges that we're living today are the result of a very successful process. Claudia mentioned some of our successes, but it's not only the sustained poverty reduction, which is very evident, right, in every index and in every way that you measure it, not only poverty, but multidimensional poverty as well. But we have also have had a very sustained reduction in inequality. The thing is that sometimes people, when they look at this index, they don't see adequately how this reduction has taken place in the recent years, because the index is constructed in a way that is less sensitive to extreme changes and to what happens in the extremes. So these changes are gradual in time, and that has happened in Chile. I mean, if you take the data from 1990 and you measured it until 2018, the index moved almost 8 points. So it's a lot. It's a lot for a country that it's not a developed country and that it's progressing. But we also have a high social mobility in Chile. Like if you compare, for example, families coming from low-income families that have studied in the university, the possibility of those students that come from low-income families to today have access to universities and make a jump to obtain in the future further income much better than their families. It's quite remarkable in Chile what has happened, and there are many studies that can evidence that. Of course, all of us here, we would like to be better at that way, or to have a better quality in our education. But the jump that we have experimented in this 30 years has been very impressive. And that is also shown by indexes such as the Human Development Index that positions Chile in a very high position. So I think our story is one of success, but with that success comes new challenges, new efforts that the governments have to make. And that has a lot to do with the middle income families that now are experimenting new uncertainties. And I believe that the political class in general has been slow and has not been rapidly attending those demands. And I think that those demands are legitimate and that we have to abort them. But I'm not sure if those demands are answered by the constitutional process that we are going to face in Chile, most likely at the ending October, right, with the plebiscite. Because I think those demands are more of the orbit of the public policy issues. Yeah, we're talking about how to make the labor market work better. We're talking about how to improve our pension system. We're talking about how to make, for example, and a very important point is how to make women and men equal in terms of their labor and the salary that they receive. We are talking about of improving the quality of our public education. And I think all those things that are legitimate demands from the middle income class, especially because we still have some people living in poverty that we do need to take care, are not constitutional demands. And this drives me to what the point that I want to make is that everybody here has made a brilliant explanation of our rules, of the procedure, of the constitutional itinerary that we're gonna be facing if the approved position wins in October, which is most likely. And I think that the rules that Ernesto and Claudio explained, and also Claudia, I think they're good rules in the sense that they have powerful incentives for the members of the conventional constitution to reach agreements, because we have to always remember that if they don't reach an agreement, what will rule is the current constitution. So I think incentives are well placed. I think the rules also promote agreements that are further than the majority, right? With this 2/3 of the Constitutional Convention having to agree the rules. I think that the restraints that the convention has are appropriate, are adequate, and if they are interpreted in good faith, which I believe is the spirit, I think the process, the design of the process is properly made, and that should give us certain certainties and tranquility regarding the process. However, I do believe that there are things that are like aside the process that we should consider, and that, at least from my point of view, represent uncertainties. And I believe that we should consider them because we are public actors. We're involved in the public debate, and we should help we should help confronting these issues in an adequate level of the debate. For example, these middle income class demands today that are not, from my point of view, demands that can be properly challenged in a constitution procedure. There are certain political parties or certain actors in the public debate that confuse, I guess, what the people want and what are the expectations of the people, and confuse what are the Chilean dream that we should be walking to with what a constitution is. And they're very different things, because although in the constitution, you, of course, you are going to put down certain values that the society shares, and that we're moving towards those values to implement them, right, in the policy. It's different from the dreams of the people. So when the constitution is confused with the provision of certain goods or certain rights, I think that that's not only inappropriate in terms of what the expectations that we are creating in the Chilean population, but it's also inappropriate because it's not the instrument. As the way I see it, a constitution should organize the power, right? The power of the state, should establish the controls for those powers, and should also establish very clearly which are our freedoms and which are our rights, precisely because they are a limit to that power of the state. But the constitution is not an instrument to fulfill social dreams. And in that sense, I see that there's a bit of a confusion in the tone of the Chilean debate to what the constitution should do. Yeah? For example, just to give you an example, we're now discussing, one of the discussions has to do with the rights that we're going to introduce in our constitution, in the new constitution, because besides of the civil rights or the classical liberties that we all have, there's this social rights. Like we have some in our constitution today: right to education, to access education, to the health system, to social security. But there are other rights that are now part of the debate, like, for example, to housing, to a proper housing, and who should provide those rights, and what are the actions that the population have to make enforceable those rights. And that's a very complicated problem, because first of all, when you norm these things in very detailed fashion in a constitution, then you are diminishing inappropriately the power that the governments and the relevant congresses have in their day-to-day business. That is, those are, to my point of view, you can establish rights, but how those rights are implemented, how those rights are given to the people, what instruments do the people have to make them enforceable? I don't think the Constitution is the right instrument to materialize those norms, but we should be very condescendent with the legislator, because the legislator in each and every government, whatever political color it is, has the right to implement their program in a constitution that it's a frame. Okay, but today in the Chilean debate, I see that is an uncertainty, because there's a certain confusion about what the constitution can do in terms of these middle income demands, and what is really the function that the constitution should really take place in Chile within the rules. The other thing that it's, to me, an uncertainty today and has to do with the rules is that today we have the reform that was approved in the Congress last year says that all the norms have to be approved. Each norm has to be approved by 2/3 of the conventional constitution or the mixed conventional constitution. And today there's a certain debate about, okay, each rule will be approved by 2/3, but what do we do at the end of the day? Should we approve the whole constitution also by 2/3? Should we not approve it by 2/3? And then by which majority should we approve it? That's something that will have to be decided by the own constitutional convention, because one of the first mandates that the convention has is to dictate its own rules, the procedural rules, okay? How it will work. It will work in committees, in assembly. It will work if the decisions that are going to be taken, for example, in the committees will require the same 2/3 majority or just a simple majority, and the 2/3 is only for the assembly as a whole. And then what happens with the voting of the whole constitution? I think, and it would be very enlightening if this could be properly and soon become something out of the debate, and that the political parties could agree more or less in a way that they could propose the convention. They are free to look at these rules or not, but But I think this is something that it would give certainty to the Chilean population, to the investors, that we have agreed in the rules in a prior fashion. Yes, 2 minutes, okay. And then the third uncertainty that I see today, and that I would also expect that people behind the process and in the process would have to clear up soon, has to do with this hoja en blanco that we call in Chile. It's that we start from a paper that's a blank paper, right? My correct interpretation of that is that you're not obliged by the current constitution, nor by any constitution in Chile or compared constitutions, but we do have a traditional constitution. We do have a constitutional tradition that we should respect, because in my belief, no generation should be smart enough to disregard the experience and the rules that in the past have served our population and our country. And not only our population and our country, but has also made our country very attractive in Latin America to be a platform for many of the investments that many other companies around the world make. So I believe that the convention should be able to take what it has worked properly, and I'm going to use the word amend, okay? It's not an amendment because it's a whole new constitution, but amend what has not worked properly. And I think that one of the things that is not working properly, as Ernesto was saying, is the relationship between the government and the Congress. And we need to establish more bridges of collaboration between those two very important co-legislators in Chile, so that we can, or that our institutions can satisfy the demands of, I would say, mostly coming from the middle income class family. So those are the uncertainties that I see today in the process, that they're not solved, and they're maybe going to be solved only when the convention starts working. But I hope that they can bring a solution soon enough. So, because for the greater good of our own country, the less certainty we bring to the process, then I think the more successful it will be.
I challenge you not to feel optimistic about a country where you get lawyers and academics together at a table and they're actually able to make presentations within time limits. If that is not a good sign of a country's future, I do not know what is. Thank you all for such fascinating, articulate, and speedy explanations of your views. I'm going to group the many, many questions that have come through to the best ability possible. We have about 15 minutes of expected time with each other. I'm going to start off with a question from one member here who asks, and I'm going to direct this just at the top to Claudia. What would be the political consequence of an 80%, 80-20 reform approval versus a 51-49? What consequences would this have for the new constitution? Mute.
Okay, I couldn't find the button. I think difference in between approval and rejection, a big difference would be important, but I think that's not really the question today. The question is rather how many people are going to vote, because I think all the polls are showing a very big distance between approval and rejection for the approval. And so it is to be expected that approval will win by a very large difference, but it's not clear how representative will that be in terms of how many people will actually go to the polls and vote because of the COVID, because of the pandemic. So I think it's very unfortunate that we're having this very important historic moment today in this context where people are more afraid than would be, I mean, are afraid, I mean, of getting sick. And so that may make some people more hesitant, even though they may want to vote. People who would have voted in normal times may not vote. And I think voter turnout is really important to give a clear mandate to the convention in their work. So I think no matter how many people vote, the decision, there will be a decision, but it's not the same to have a decision with low turnout than with high turnout. So I think the legitimacy of the mandate is important for the legitimacy of the entire process and for the strength of the Constitution in the future. So I think that's really what we should focus on.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Another question from the audience is regarding what examples do we have in the region and globally of other countries recently writing new constitutions? When have they failed, and what are the risks? And I will direct that to Claudio, since you opened the doorways to that, mentioning other constitutional processes.
Well, there are like several stages of changing the constitutions in Latin America and abroad, and the first thing is that in general trend, the most recent constitutional processes include more and more citizen participation. I mean, from model of top-down kind of processes with special commissions, now it's very infrequent processes in which you do not include like or ratification or popular creation of assemblies or convention, etc., etc. So that feature open up the question of first whether citizen participation and political parties and political actors and social actors are included or not within the process. I think that that is a key issue, and recent. I mean, recent. I'm thinking in 20 or 25 years. In Latin America, those that are excluding sectors are less successful than those that are including actors or social and political actors. The second feature concerning the issue, the rules of decision, I think that is a key issue. Most of the processes are with a simple majority, but some of them are with special majorities. I tend to think that it's better with the special majorities because it's allow like a better opportunities for having broader consensus on and do not have an inflation of expectations on citizens concerning the constitution itself. What Natalia was saying, in general, I think the rule of 2/3, which is very demanding in the case of Chile, I would prefer 3/5 or a little bit lower, but that rule, the 2/3 rule of decision, I think that will create first the need for broader consensus, and second, a minimal, because it's a broad consensus, is a minimal constitution in comparison to other where a big majority impose a constitution and in general tend to be very long, very detailed constitution. I think that that would not be the case of Chile. So I think that these two main issues are relevant, and probably the third one is that you have in certain processes like Colombia, even Bolivia, after a very tense moment, you have a good moment afterwards because of the inclusion of the political participation and social participation in the process itself.
Claudio, I just want to, para precisar now, essentially what you're saying is that you personally would be more comfortable with, and if I understood Natalia earlier when she was speaking, as it stands now, the actual convention will determine whether or not the document is passed with a 2/3 majority or with a simple majority. As it currently stands, the convention will determine its rules with the 2/3 rule, or how is that distinction? Is it, do we know how it would be passed, or do we just know how the rules would be made?
No. Today, the rule is already set. So I was talking, like assuming that it's already set, the rules. The rules today is that the norms will be, I mean, each article will be passed by two-thirds of the delegates. So that is the rule. Now, particularly the right wing have opened up a discussion on whether it would be required to have a 2/3 approval of the overall constitution. Once it's in like defined article by article, the overall convention will approve by 2/3 as in the second round. That is not set right now in the agreement in the constitution. So that is a matter of discussion. Now, maybe the convention might have some debate about, I mean, probably will have a particular, I mean, some actors in the convention will put in place, okay, let's try to solve this, and some debate will be about this, but I don't know whether this will be approved by the convention, but that is a decision of the convention, like a second round of approval by 2/3 of the overall text once they have an agreement.
Cassandra, may I jump in for a second?
Absolutely, please do, Ernesto.
Yeah. The rules are exactly as Claudio and Natalia mentioned before, but I just want to introduce to the conversation the idea of political behavior, because let's go to the convention and let's assume for 1 minute that you are part of the minority, okay? You have to give 1/3 of the votes, of your votes, in order to reach 2/3 to find an agreement, to reach an agreement in the rules of procedure, right? You will try to find a way to get that in those rules, you will get a rational vote of the complete text, okay? So if you don't get that, I assume that's a matter of how I experienced 8 years in Congress and a little bit of looking political behaviors in textbooks, that the minority is not going to vote yes to the rules of procedure. So that might take time, as it happens, I think, in the Constitution of 1925. So you reach one agreement at all. That's what I think could happen, that you will find and you will reach an agreement in the text of the Constitution. And once you have a reasonable agreement on that, you will have an agreement on the rules of procedure. That's not what the text is saying, but I'm trying to anticipate how political behavior is going to take place. And there are reasons for that, because if, for example, we follow strictly the rules stated in the Constitution, then you can have a president, you can have a constitution with a president, but without Congress.
Yeah.
You can have some rights declared and stated in the Constitution, but no enforcement. So there is a combination of rules and behavior that, in my point of view, it's going to create an environment of we need to reach an agreement in order to have a comprehensive look at the text, and that will allow our rules of procedure approved as soon as possible. I suggest to consider that when looking at the process next year.
Yeah.
Yes, Natalia.
Yeah, and if you look at other procedures, like in other countries, you find some experiences that might be helpful to ours in terms of that political behavior that Ernesto was mentioning. For example, there are procedures that have agreed from the very beginning a draft, like a rough draft of what will be the Constitution. Yeah, it's not only an index, it's not only an outline, it's a draft, okay, that has to be polished, but it contains like the most important norms in every chapter, because in that way you can have like an overview of what this constitution will look like, and you will be more inclined to start giving the approvals in a chronological vote, right? Than when you don't know how the rest of the chapters of the Constitution are going to more or less look like. That, of course, does not replace the whatever number of successive votes that will have to take place until all the parties in this process feel comfortable enough to provide their third vote for the agreement to take place. There are other processes. For example, I think that the South African process did that. It's that they from the very beginning, they draft a set of principles or objectives that this constitution should also be looking forward to. And that's also very useful because, again, it frames the discussion and it gives the relevant actors, whatever political tendencies they have, it gives it a frame, and it gives them a natural field where they can then discuss the rules, the specific rules that they're going to introduce in the Constitution. So I think those processes that have engaged in having more or less complete drafts at the beginning before any voting takes place, or a declaration of principles, that in the case of Chile is delicate and complicated because the political climate, in a way, it's weird today. I mean, it's not what it was perhaps 5 or 6 years ago. We're living certain tensions, so I don't know if they're going to be able to agree in those principles, but there are good experiences in which any of these two features have served and enriched the process of the constitutional conventions in those countries.
As we are now reaching near the end of the time, I have received several questions relating to either recent eruptions of violence in Chile or the way in which the pandemic is affecting this process. What I would like to do is just do a rapid return to each of you, and you can choose to either discuss what for you would be an indicator that the process is going well as it proceeds moving forward. What to you would be an indicator that the process is not going on well? What are the risk factors for those folks who are looking at Chile from outside and trying to discern and understand what is going on? What are moments that are going to be particularly important in trying to understand this process? So those are, I'm going to throw all of those on the table like a buffet. Pick as you wish, minute and a half, and I will start with Ernesto, then Claudia, Claudio, and Natalia, okay? Ernesto.
Thank you, Cassandra. Well, in terms of the impact of the pandemic, I think that it's difficult to assess for me. We have several cities still under strict quarantine. So I think they're going to remove the quarantine in the next couple of days in order to allow people to vote. But that's the environment in Chile, as in many other countries. So the way people get informed or campaign about this very fundamental process is different across the country. And that's one of my concerns related to the political participation and vote. Remember that in Chile, I would say a relevant part of the people that vote are above 50 or 60 years old, and they are concerned partly with the process. So I have a lot of uncertainty on that. Second, related to the political environment, I would like to be optimistic, as I mentioned before, because I think it's time for leadership. But today, there was a vote of I don't know the word in English. It's sort of impeachment against a former Ministry of Health. He was accused of several issues, especially of hiding information, but he was removed several months ago, and the vote, he won by 2 votes. This is the government that, or the opposition that has placed more constitutional accusations or impeachment in our recent history. And now we have a constitutional accusation against the head of the cabinet. He's in charge of the police and the public order and to fighting against crime. So it's not easy for the government. I won't say anything about the opposition. It's not easy for the government to face and contain violence because the government is not finding enough support in the political system in order to do that. We have several problems with our police and we need to improve them. But I think the problem of violence is going to keep with us for several months.
Thank you very much, Ernesto. Claudia?
I think regarding the pandemic, I think it will obviously have an impact on voter turnout. So that's, I think, an important concern. And unfortunately, I think the authorities have been slow to implement measures that give people security, to say in advance, this is how it will happen, to say in advance, we will make transport easier and safe so you can go and vote. So I think that's a problem we're facing. But I wanted to focus on one of the dangers I see in the process. I think one of the dangers, there may be others, but one that I'm concerned about is that political elites, I don't know if they're really reading how much things have changed in Chile in the last 30 years. And I'm afraid that the political elites will take this as business as usual and keep working on the Constitution as if it was a regular Congress election. I think we're dealing with something completely different. First, because it's different to make a constitution than to make laws. I think you need much more focus on what's on the convergence rather than on the differences. So you really need good faith to build dialogue and to build agreement. And I don't know if that's present in all the political forces. But most of all, I don't know if political elites in particular are aware of how much disconnected they are with most of the Chileans, how little representative they are. So to address a little bit what Ernesto was saying about the 2005 reform in the Lagos government, Claudio actually wrote a book about that, El Pacto. The 2005 reform, President Lagos could say that it was a new constitution because he thought that the people doing the constitution were representative of society. But the reform was done behind closed door by very few actors, without asking anything to anybody, without having public discussion of what was going on. And I think you can't keep doing politics like that in Chile anymore. So this constitutional process, I think the main goal of the process is to build the political legitimacy. And they're not going to build political legitimacy if they keep it behind closed doors and if the convention works as Congress has worked all this time without putting a lot more effort in really increasing inclusion, openness of the debates, creating public debate, making participatory mechanisms. So I think in this case, the how is as important as the what. How you make the Constitution is as important as what you put in the Constitution. And I think, unfortunately, political elites in Chile are focusing a lot on what and not so much on how.
Thank you, Claudia. Let's move to Claudio.
Yeah, concerning violence, I think is a very relevant issue, and I'm very concerned about that. Chile was depicted as Claudia at the beginning of her presentation was saying, Chile was depicted at the beginning of the transition as the exception of Latin America. We were looked like an European country by the end of the 1990s, at the end of the 1990s. But now we look like more similar to Latin America, and we went back to Latin America. And violence is one of the issues that is right now in the debate, and I think it's a multi-dimensional problem that involves in the South a social movement, indigenous social movement claiming for territorial land, but combined with illegal business activities, corruption of the police, etc., etc., etc. In the central area, we have narco trafficking activities combined with a group of society that are very autonomous, acting very violently. I'm not trying to justify violence. I'm trying to explain the phenomena, and the phenomena is a very multidimensional problem, and with and I think a very problematic issue, which is the the weak police that we have. We have a very weak intelligence service. We have weak police. We have a distrust of the police, which is something new in the Chilean landscape, and the political electoral debate in Chile is mostly focused on the government saying to the opposition, hey, you know, you are not stemming violence, and the opposition saying, hey, you know, the police is a problem. So we are in this deadlock kind of situation, and the violence continues. So I think that within an electoral process, within a constitutional process, that is very likely that will happen, is a very problematic context for a good discussion on the next 25, 20 or 30 or 50 years of constitutional Chile. So I'm worried.
Thank you, Claudio. And now closing arguments from Natalia.
Yes. Regarding the issues that we're facing now, well, the pandemic it's a world issue. I'm concerned about the will that the people will have to go to vote. In Chile, we have a voluntary system of voting, especially from the elderly, especially from the groups that are at risk. I think that there will be some harm in terms of participation, and I regret that, because we don't have other remote systems as in other countries in which you can vote remotely. And we're not going to implement them now because it's such an important process that you cannot speed up in reforms that need to be implemented with a due course of time, so that we don't risk the certainty of our electoral system, which is very certain. So there's an issue there, of course. As Claudia mentioned, there are several electoral stages. I hope that for the next ones, we're going to be in a stage in the pandemic that people can really participate without feeling at a risk of health. And especially, well, the last electoral in the process moment is the plebiscite, the ratificatory plebiscite, which has a mandatory vote. That's not with a voluntary vote, it's mandatory vote. And I hope that by then vaccines are spread around most of the world and we can face it without having the pandemic problems. I'm going to connect political problems and public disorders in the following sense. I'm worried, and I think that our political class should start soon to give some signs to the society that they respect the rule of law, that the rule of law is an essential part of our democracy, because what we have been seeing in the last months, and it has been exacerbated by the pandemic, it's a conduct in which there are many representatives that are reading the laws in a very convenient way, and in my view, skipping the rules of law to promote certain policies, skipping, including the current constitutional laws, to promote certain policies. And there has been a lot of debate here in Chile about that way to proceed. And I think it's a bad way to proceed because it somehow puts the precedent for the Constitutional Convention. I mean, if the current parliament it's willing and it's allowing the skipping of the rule of law, then we have a problem, because what we are all aiming here, and as I said before, the rules are clear and they're good rules, is that they are respected, right? And we need signs from the politicians that are going to participate in the conventional constitution, the political parties that are participating mostly. We need signs that they are willing to respect the rules. And in that sense, and that's where I connect with our problems of the violent protests is that I agree with Claudio that I don't think that any political party, I mean, at least of the traditional forces in Chile, left and wing parties, neither of the parties are promoting actively the violence. Okay, they have all condemned it, and I think that that's a correct position, and that they should, of course, maintain that position. But what I'm worried about is that for some groups and some political parties, the violence has been useful. It's not the same that promoting violence, but it has been useful for the obtainment of certain purposes. And in that sense, there is a certain disconnection between the declarations of the politicians saying we condemn violence, but then what do we do to really put action to that declaration? Are we approving, like, for example, Claudia was mentioning, we do have problems in our intelligence system. Are we moving forward with the laws in Congress that are improving the intelligence system? It has been very hard. It's been already almost like 2 years, and the reform is stuck. Are we approving the reforms to our police? That it's, of course, not only that reform is the one that is needed. We need a lot of reforms, and we also need a cultural changes as well. But are we pushing those reforms? No, they're also stuck. Are we supporting the political authorities in the respect of the public order? It's a matter of discussion. So I guess those things are for me, and because this will probably accompany the whole process. So it's important that at some point, and sooner than later, our politicians start giving correct signs in terms of respect of the rule of law, and that violence can serve no purpose. It doesn't matter that, I mean, it's not only for the plebiscite now to be ordered or for the next election to be held in an ordered fashion. No, it's because no violent society can, of course, progress. No violent society can sustain democracy. And we have to be very clear in that.
I thank you all for those responses, and I apologize as I have many, many more questions from all of you who have joined us tonight. We promised a very short talk of just an hour. We have somewhat gone over that hour, and it is in that spirit that I will then say, we hope that this is just the beginning of conversations about issues relating to political institutions in Chile, relating to this process. I hope that the tenor and the quality of all of these comments tonight are a harbinger for the kind of dialogue that will happen in Chile in the coming months. And I just want to thank each one of you for making a special time to come together. At one moment, we were almost 50 folks on this call to join in, to listen, and to learn. And just thank you, Manuelita, for organizing this series and for the participants tonight. So on that note, I don't know, Manuelita, if you have any other closing ideas before we shut down the call, but just gracias a todos, un lujo. Realmente un lujo estar con ustedes.
Can everyone hear me? I just want to echo the words of Cassandra. Thank you all. Thank you for the speakers for your participation. And yes, I do hope that we can continue having these kinds of conversations where we can all learn from each other. I would definitely love to have you all back post-vote and during the process or whatever that process might be. And would like to thank all the audience for staying with us. Without you, none of this would be possible. The message here is the importance of voting, like in anything that's going on in the world. So I just message to you. I urge you to participate. If you participate, then you feel like you are included in the process. I want to invite you all to our events that are happening this week. Tomorrow, we will have an event called Chile and the Challenges of Multilateralism. On the occasion, the ambassador to the UN, Milenko Spotnik, will be talking. and as the General Assembly commemorates its 75th anniversary. So I invite you all to join us tomorrow. That is tomorrow at 3 o'clock New York time. And again, thank you for participating. Thank you, Cassandra, for being an amazing, and hope you all have a very good evening. Good night.
My pleasure. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night to all. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Thank you.